And we are live. Welcome to the book launch for Keith Anthony Baird's Synthetica, which actually comes out on Tuesday. I'm Heather. This
I'm
is
Steve.
We're Bridge Escape Press, and you guys aren't really here to see us. So, Keith, why don't you introduce yourself? Oh, streaming to Facebook.
Hello,
Okay.
I'm Keith Anthony Baird, previously self-published author of many different things, but now I'm with the lovely BGP crowd. I brought out Spinneret, which was a dark fantasy title, and today it's all about Synthetica. So I pass you over to the other guys involved.
All right, Bev, how about you?
Okay, my name is Beverly Lee, and I'm a dark fiction author concentrating on character-driven dark fiction, build-up of atmosphere and dread, and I also write dark vampire queer romance with Nicole Agenor.
Heather can testify to the atmosphere and dread.
Yeah.
Sorry, Heather.
Yeah, it's all right. All right, Alex, how about you?
So I'm an illustrator. I'm also a dyslexic writer. I started writing a little while ago for my daughter, who loves reading. So that's what got me over dyslexia to write, basically.
Excellent. And Alex is the cover artist for Synthetica. So excellent. So usually how we started is I tell the story about how we were horrible to my mother growing up. And she read to us every day and every night. And she was a nurse. So she would work 12-hour floor shifts, and she would come home, and we would basically keep her up until as late as we possibly could, making her read stories to us. And she read us everything. And because of that, still to this day, often when I'm reading, my mother's voice becomes the narrator of the story in my head. And so when we get together and read manuscripts, my green light always happens when the narrator becomes my mother's voice. And it can happen anywhere in the book. And sometimes they're not even really what I would call captivating passages that would make you go out and buy the book. But it's when my mother starts telling the story. And so I'm going to read that passage from Synthetica. Now, I follow their stairs and find my prize, a gift courtesy of a rogue municipal garbage tool. I pick it up, duck into an alleyway, and it isn't long before I'm approaching my own parked up car. I remote open the doors just as Gans did, and when I reach it, I throw my evidence inside by its long, lank hair. His head nestles sweetly into the contour of the passenger seat, and I tell my grab to fire up before I step in. You can't get a payday without any proof, and Gans's face isn't looking quite so smug anymore. So that was the section. And I have to choose, I got in trouble early on because it was a passage that Steve edited out of a book. I very rarely read the finished copy. Like I read the manuscript, I read through Steve's edits. And then sometimes I don't see it again. And so I read a passage that had been edited out, and somebody DM'd me and was like, I read this whole story and never saw this passage. And I was like, oh. But now I very carefully go back and final manuscript to see if I can find the same passage. And if not, I find a similar one or the new edited version, so I don't get caught again reading from a first draft.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Heather, because that scene that you're talking about, and Steve well knows this, and so does Alex. Bev won't. I mean, Gans got decapitated in an entirely different way, a more catastrophic way.
Yes.
Which I think Steve thought was perhaps a little bit over the top.
A little over the top or so early in the story, but that's why I was making that point that I had to go back, because it was the decapitation, and I was like, all right, let me just double check. And then I was like, oh, where is it? I mean, like I probably got through the first quarter of the book, and I was like, no, I know it's in like the first 10 pages. So I had to go back and find the similar passage that indicates, what happens. But that was pretty good. I call it the Steve move. Well, when he edits out the Steve movie, edits out mom's voice.
Well, I have to say, that also was a point for me when it's like, okay, this is a good story.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm reading this. We're definitely going to publish this.
Yeah.
I loved it, and I wanted to read more. It's also when I brought my editing pen out.
Yeah. That's how Steve knows. That's when Steve makes his green light decision, is when he reaches for a pen. You know,
Right.
he's like,
Okay.
hold on.
He's on board.
That's kind of his tell. The one that's difficult is Clyde. And so it's a family mom and pop press, and Clyde is our son.
Yeah.
And he's a tough sell. Steve and I can greenlight a project and he'll be like, I mean, I'll say yes, but I'm going to need to see some edits here and some edits here. And he can be merciless. In his, he's the brutal one among us. I blame his generation.
Well, it doesn't even get into that much discussion between us. I'll handle a manuscript. He'll look at it, hand it back, and just go, nope.
Yeah, and that's it. There's no discussion. I'm like, hold on. Why no? We need to talk it out. And he's like, you just know these things instinctually. So, but you know,
wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's the secret weapon in the arsenal. That's what it is.
He really is. He really is. And it's funny because I've been known to try to bribe him. If Steve and I don't agree, I've been known to be like, hey, listen, you're not going to remember this, but over 2 decades ago, I spent 23 hours strapped to a bed trying to give birth to you. So I just want you to remember that when it comes down to choosing between Dad and I, he may be more nurturing, he may be your favorite parent, but just remember, I'm the only reason you're alive. The only.
I like that.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
Clyde owes you. He owes you. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, the
that is the trump card, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I would say though, just a quick side note on that, and this is one, I'm glad my son brings this up because it's more keeping me in touch with the younger generations and what they like to read. Because I grew up reading, you know, H.G. Wells and Jack London, Dickens, and a lot of other things. My son, I tried to get him into Jack London. He goes, this is too wordy, too descriptive. He spends 4 pages describing the snow. We need to stop.
That was it.
And it's like, this is awful. So, you know, it does keep me in touch with what the younger
readers, right.
read. They want to get more into the action and get.
So
just interesting to it.
It is interesting, the different generational tendencies. So so he gets 1/3 of the vote, but we have, you know, it's funny, I don't know that we've ever all disagreed on a book, you know, where like 2 of us greenlighted it, 1 of us was like absolutely not. So that could be because we raised him. So though he has different interests in books, he's, you know, I did control his reading list for years. So, but so one of the things about Synthetica that I really liked was, and I will also tell you, I think this may only be my 2nd cyberpunk story, like in my whole life. And I was almost certain it was my first, but I think back when I was growing up, the big anthology we always waited for was Asimov's science fiction and fantasy anthology that came out every year. I'm almost certain my senior year of high school, there was a cyberpunk short story. And in one of those that I read and was like, interesting. But I'm kind of interested in getting back into it now. Once we read that, I was like, we're going to have to add a little more cyberpunk into the Heather world, I think. Because I'm a huge fan of steampunk. And I have an interesting relationship with cyber and AI and robots because I was very young when I read Asimov for the first time. And so I have a kind of fear of the machines taking over that I'm not sure a lot of people my age have. But, and I have to tell you, this book kind of really fed into it. I was like, okay, this is real. People are like going to disappear into the machines. And it was, you know, Matrixy in that way. Like when we watched The Matrix for the first time, I was like, this is a nightmare.
Yeah.
So what made you want to ride cyberpunk? Because I feel like this is different from the other stuff that you've done that I've read.
I think I've always kind of approached fiction. I never wanted to be sort of pigeonholed in any sense. So I just thought to myself, well, I'm just going to call myself a dark fiction author. And then hopefully that will give me the freedom to kind of explore lots of different things. Because for me, obviously, dark fantasy comes into that, folk horror comes into that, sort of straightforward horror, psychological thrillers, and kind of mysteries and crime. And and also I thought, well, obviously, sci-fi can be very dark as well.
Yes.
And I guess I just thought to myself, I think at that point when I wrote Synthetica, I'd done quite a lot of horror, and I'd done an apocalyptic as well, which was kind of integrated with horror, and I just kind of thought to myself, well, I've done those things. I just want to explore something else, which is kind of under that umbrella, and I knew that obviously to satisfy myself and my own sort of journey with the writing, that it would have to be dark as well. But I mean, fundamentally at the heart of it, what I was trying to say, I mean, there's a piece in there which is the Pledge of Allegiance. It's only a very small piece, but it's about the senator who's running for office, trying to become the president. And basically his statement is, if the country elect me, I will make sure that the veterans are better taken care of. So, like, at the heart of the story, that's what I was saying. This is what this is really all about. Is we expect them to make great sacrifices, but how really do we look after them after that? So that's really what it was about for me. So
because the thing when we first started talking about it, I was like, how do we market it? Is it military sci-fi? Is it dystopian? Is it cyberpunk? Is it noir? Because it kind of hits all of those buttons for me. And so, which I love. I mean, bring me a mashup of any kind and make it possible to market. And I'm like, that's fine. We'll figure it out. Bring me the mashup. Bring me the mashup. But I really like that. And that's interesting because I never really think about how other countries treat veterans. I know how we do it in this country. And a lot of people don't know this, but Steve's a veteran.
Yeah, I know.
He was in counterintelligence in the Army.
Okay.
In the Army. I'm not going to say anything else.
Okay, we don't need to talk.
But for several years. But it is very different, and we have a lot of
janitorial.
Yeah, he was a painter. Isn't that what you always said? I was a painter. But But so I've never really thought about veteran affairs and other countries, but I'm kind of maybe getting from your point and from the book that maybe it's not so hot in Great Britain either, that the veteran benefits are not superb. So that is interesting, because it is the one job where they don't guarantee you will come home alive. And and I sometimes feel like they're always mildly surprised when you do here in this country. They're like, oh, okay, so more veterans this year. But so that's interesting.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I just felt that sometimes they make the ultimate sacrifice with their lives, but quite often, more often than not, they come back and they're physically scarred, and they're psychologically scarred, and I just think that a lot of countries, I'm not saying for every country, because I simply don't know that situation, but I think in a lot of cases it's kind of like, well, okay, we'll give you some rehabilitation, we'll give you some counseling for your PTSD or whatever, but then these men and women have to then go back into society, and they may face 4 more decades or 5 more decades of life where they have to struggle with their disabilities and all the rest of it. They've got a very different outlook and prospect after that. And I just didn't think it's just something we just don't give enough credence to, I think.
Right. And it's difficult. I think it can be difficult for veterans to get jobs. And it is especially difficult when it's a disabled vet who especially is working in this country a non-union job, because in America, capitalism reigns supreme. And so unions offer you some protections for sure, but not, I mean, nothing's perfect, but it can be very difficult because you can be labeled as a difficult employee, if you have to have some kind of reasonable accommodation for PTSD, because that's real. There are people we have friends who are vets who basically go on lockdown around our Independence Day because the fireworks can be very triggering. For that.
Yeah, they have to be somewhere removed from it,
quiet, right, where they're not going to hear it as much, not see it, and can just kind of have a calmer holiday away from all the noise. But yeah, because
and there's a lot of homeless vets in
yes
the country too. I mean, it's just
the homelessness rate is high among vets in our country. Because they need more resources than they get. They need more mental health resources than they get, I think. So, yeah. But okay, so back to the book. I could go. Right. We could write a book. We could write our own book on veteran benefits in the United States.
So going back to the book, but also the cyberpunk genre or subgenre, did you have any particular books or films that inspired you in the writing of this?
I mean, I think, like, obviously over the years, there's obviously various books that I've read, but then there's various movies that I've seen. I think it's, when, everything under the sun has been done, really, hasn't it? So, like, so, like, you can't, it's very, very difficult to come up with an original idea. So I think all you can do is really put your spin on it. And I think what I always try to do anyway, whenever I write anything, I try to almost shut the door really in my mind to any kind of external influences. And I just try to focus on what it is that I want to say. But I mean, I think, you certainly can't get away from the fact that subconsciously things are going to filter in, because you can't shut the door entirely on that kind of thing, and it is going to color what you produce. I think the way that I kind of approached the book was this isn't about what I'm imagining what that scenario or what that future would be. I try to write it as if this is what the character Hendrix would imagine what that future would be, through his own experiences and his own imagination. That was how I was trying to write it. So, like, say, for instance, I don't know, a reviewer might say, well, there's nothing new in this. Flying cars have been in this, that, and the other. But that's the kind of, they're making a point, but they're actually missing a point, because the point is that the future that's being generated and created is going to be built on experiences of what people think it would be like. So I kind of understand that if people read it and review it, they might not actually get fully what I was trying to do. I get that, but then I'm sure it will click with some people as well. So so I mean, that was really my mission, was to make it Hendrix's mission, to make the story his story, the story that he was telling in his mind.
And Hendrix is one of those characters that you almost kind of love to hate. Like, there's a lot of Hendrix where you're like, it rubs the edge, where there are a couple places in the book where you're almost sympathetic to Hendrix. Like, you know what I mean? Just enough of his backstory is revealed where you're like, oh, okay, Okay. But then the story kind of swing arcs and you're like, oh no. It's so, but I love that. I love that kind of character development. So let's talk about, and Bev and Alex, I'm going to ask you, in the books that you enjoy reading, not necessarily Synthetica, do you like the arc where the character is, I don't want to say unlovable because there's a really dark spot in me that loves Hendrix, but I don't like to say that out loud. But and listen, Steve doesn't like it when I say this because he thinks it reflects badly on him, but I do love an asshole character. So I do sometimes. I mean, like, I'm a big fan of Wuthering Heights because Heathcliff and Kathy are horrible people.
Yeah.
I mean, horrible. And every time I reread it, they seem worse. I'm like, I don't know if it's because I'm older or I've read the story so many times. I'm now looking at it differently, but Heathcliff is awful. And so I really enjoy the book. I know that there will be some readers who are like, listen, I need somebody somebody's got to be a hero, somebody I can like. But I am definitely a fan of the flawed main character that you can't really fall all the way in love with, you know. And so I really enjoy that kind of read. But what about you, Bev? Do you like a story with
I really enjoy a multi-layered, flawed character. I mean, I've written so many characters that are like that, and then I've had people say, "Oh, but he was so awful," and I'm like, "Yeah, but the story, he had to be awful because this is what the story demanded." And I think people that always think that the main character has to be the hero or the heroine are missing such a great amount of enjoyment in a story, because people are flawed by the nature of how we are. Yeah, I'm definitely team flawed.
Team flawed
or protagonist.
What about you, Alex? Are you team flawed main character?
I totally agree with what Bez just said. I mean, I think as human beings, none of us are heroes, none of us are perfect. And you know, books like Keith's reminds us of the fact that we're a mixture of all different things. Hopefully none of us here are actually like Hendrix, of course.
Right, all the way.
It's a reflection that makes the character deeper and more believable, you know? If they're just that classic cliche hero that everything's perfect about them, there doesn't feel like there's any grit, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like it's actually tangible for me. So yeah, definitely. I'm team flawed as well.
And what about you? Steve may be the dissenting vote.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me first start by saying one of my favorite books still, ever since I first read it as a child, is Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So I do love the noble, heroic characters that are virtuous, but I do love the flawed ones too. I mean, I think the noble, virtuous types, they're great to read about because it's like, I could be that. I could be better. But the flawed ones do remind us of where we're at. And I think in a lot of ways, ultimately, the more interesting, as good as Lord of the Rings is with the characters like Aragorn and Gandalf and even Frodo, how noble they are, still, what's some of the most interesting parts in the book is with Gollum.
Right.
Right. I mean, I love these.
Yeah, the dichotomy good and evil creates. And I think that's it. Is I do love a hero tale, not as much as you do, but I do love a hero tale. But I really need my hero to be flawed and broken and almost maybe not even make it. Like sometimes I'll read a book and I'll be like, hey, there's no happy ending here, and that's okay. Now, don't get me wrong. I will also read romance novel in a day. You know what I mean? With a capital R, with a happy ending in the back. I read almost everything. The horror I can only read during the day. And Beverly Lee, I have to start reading like 2 hours before dark because like the dread just kind of sticks with you. It's like, who wrote The Historian? Which I'm still reading, like one page at a time.
I can't remember the author's name.
But
Elizabeth Costello wrote that.
Yes. Like
She'll read one chapter of that every few months, and in the morning, always in full light.
And then I'll put it away for a year. So, but like Bev writes novellas, and it'll take me, didn't it take me like 7 months to finish the one we were buddy reading? And it, you know, Steve reads it in like 2 days, you know, because he's a fast reader. And I'm not a fast reader, but like I have to put the book down. I have to go stand in the sunlight. I have to kind of shake it off. Sometimes I can't read it for a couple of days. And I will tell you, when we were reading the manuscript for Synthetica, I think it was the 3rd chapter, I was like, Clyde, go ahead and read it, because I need like a day in the sunshine, because it's real gritty. You know, it's real gritty and it's real dark. And Spinneret did that to me. There's a scene, I won't give it away, but there's a clothing dressmaking scene where I was like, listen, this is probably an excellent, one of the best written scenes I've read, you know, with this kind of awfulness and dread. But I also need to have like 4 days in the sun now, you know? Right. I need to go touch grass. I need to read like Pride and Prejudice. I mean, like I'm going to read a kind of fluffy romance. And
I'm really sorry, Heather, that my writing does that to you. I have to apologize. I really do.
It is funny because the first books we published were horror. You know, like when we started, I was like, what do we want to start with? And Steve's like, horror. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. And then we started reading manuscripts, and I was like, oh, God, I'm going to start drinking again. We're going to have to really breathe through this a little. But because I have a very overactive imagination. And so okay, listen, I'm afraid of the dark. And I mean, in real life, I'm afraid of the dark. And probably the worst 7 years we had of it is when we lived out on the ranch. You know, my grandparents started to get older and started to do the things where they would get up in the middle of the night and use the restroom, and one of them would fall down and the other one couldn't get them up off the floor. And so we had an opportunity to move into a house right up against their property. And so instead of being gone in the middle of the night for 2 hours to go help one of them up, we were only gone 20 minutes. And so, but it's in the country, and
so at 1 in the morning,
dark in the country. I mean, dark.
And at 1 in the morning, when there's sounds of wildlife directly outside your bedroom window.
Do you remember the skunks? I had no idea what it was. I mean, we have skunks in the city, but you don't they don't dig a burrow under your bedroom window, so you don't know that they make grunty noises like a pig. And so I was like, is that a wild pig? Is there a wild pig outside? Do we live places where there's a wild pig? And Steve's like, and then of course Steve got close to the window, and then the skunk sprayed, and Steve's like, no, that would be a skunk. You know, I mean, not really. I like the wide open skies of the country, but we're not, it's really dark in the country. And we even had a ranch light. And even with the ranch light, I would be like, well, Steve had to go alone a lot, because I was like, listen, I opened the front door and it's too dark outside. So I'll see you when you get back. Tell Grandma and Grandpa I love them. So I have to stop reading horror well before dark. And Steve knows it when we've crossed a line, because Steve will wake up because I've turned on every single light in the house, not just our bedroom, the whole house, including rooms that I do not go into. Every light must be on, all outdoor lights, all indoor lights. And Steve will just kind of open an eye and be like, my eyes are going to hurt in the morning. I'm like, well, just remember you wanted to publish horror. I mean, you've done it to both of us.
So let's pull it back around to the flawed character thing. Another question I wanted to toss out to y'all. So with flawed characters, whether it's a short story or a movie or a full-length book, do you like where there's a flawed or broken character with a redemption arc, or that he's still or she is still just as broken at the end, and it's still as dark and there's no hope or nothing's changed? What do y'all think?
Who would like to go first?
Oh, okay. Was that your hand up, Ivan? No.
Go on, Bev.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm a huge fan of character-driven fiction. I don't plot my books at all. I just sit down and I write and I listen to what my characters have to say to me. And if they give me a redemption arc, I'm fine with it. But if they don't, again, I'm fine with it. Because I think they don't have to have that redemption, because whatever happens to them in the story may make that impossible.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Alex?
So I wouldn't rule out either. I would definitely read either. I think if I was honest, I prefer, there's a little bit of me that wants the kind of happy ending. They want that the victory of the redemption feels so much sweeter if the person has literally been to the darkest point possible. But I wouldn't rule out reading a book that, you know, that didn't necessarily have that as well. But if I was to say which one do I prefer, definitely is the redemption, I suppose.
What about you, Keith, for your personal reading?
I mean, I kind of find the morally grey characters the more interesting ones anyway, to be honest with you. My idea of a hero is kind of like an anti-hero. So, sort of, I guess a sort of a good example of that, which kind of mirrors Synthetica, would be Snake Plissken. Kurt Russell, yeah. So he's kind of like the hero of the story, but he's kind of rebelling against the whole sort of system and all the rest of it, you know, because he's a criminal in it, really. So those, I mean, I guess even with Spinneret, I was dealing with someone who had been displaced and wanted revenge, but there was kind of a redemption arc to that whole thing, you know. It came full circle. She became the thing. She became the creature in the story that her mother was telling her a fairy tale. She became the spider folk of the forest, you know. So and she found love that way, as opposed to finding it in human form. So I guess a bit like what Bev said, really. It's what the story says to you, and you know, it's and like, I think one of the things with the book that we're now putting out is, you know, it could be perceived as being lag within the story, because it isn't gunning all of the time. It isn't constantly moving forward. There are periods in that where he's taking time out and he wants to do a bit of reflection and he wants to do a bit of thinking. But for my mind, that wasn't lag. That was just a very human element, because he's a guy. He's not a machine. He has to stop and he has to think about. And then he's also dealing with his kind of inner demons as well, like he deals with on a daily basis. Right. So, you know, to me, there's always has to be that kind of balance there. You know, some things that I mean, I was talking to Alex the other day about this, and I said a kind of a story where it's just full on from the get-go to the end was a film that had Chris Hemsworth in, which was called Extraction, and it's just action from the very beginning all the way to the end.
Or Crank, you know.
Yeah, or Crank, yeah. So if you want to do that kind of thing, then that's fine. But I just think a lot of stories need to kind of have like a roller coaster ride. They need to have tension and release.
Definitely.
And I just think that's like a good song has that, like a good piece of classical music has tension and release. So I think stories kind of need that too. So yeah, but I mean, for me, I love the anti-heroes. You know, I just think they're a lot more interesting. Not necessarily directly the villain, you know, but you know, someone who can sort of like wrestle with a lot of contrary sort of thoughts and emotions. You know, because I think you know, we all do that, and I think the longer you've lived on the planet, the more that you've had to wrestle with as well. You know, so I kind of when I write, I kind of try to think in those terms. To be honest, yeah. So that's a good question, really.
Yeah, I think for me it's both, because I'm a mood reader. You know, when I'm reading for fun, and so if I need a redemption arc, that's the kind of story I'll pick up and read. But I will tell you, now that I've entered my 50s, I don't care as much about the redemption arc. I'm more interested in the damaged or flawed individual, not necessarily having a happy ending, just having an end to that particular story. And I don't know, but I will tell you, in my 30s, when I go back and I look at my book list, because I'm a book notator and journaler, it was mostly redemption arc characters, you know? And so I'm interested to see when I get into my 70s and look back, assuming that I don't lose all of my book journals, but look back and see if I can identify it by decade. Like, this was my decade of redemption arcs. This was my decade of broken hearts. This was my decade of, you know, grim, dark, you know, kind of stuff, because it's interesting to me that, because I'm such a mood reader, and I'll read almost everything. I read a lot of nonfiction and fiction, and I'm trying to think. Steve actually cornered me once, and he's like, "You do read everything, but you don't read this." Do you remember what it was? Is there a genre you won't read or you don't enjoy reading?
I think for me personally, I would probably struggle with romance. I don't think I've ever been really drawn to that kind of thing. But it's really interesting because I think I mentioned this again to Alex the other day. I'm writing, strangely, an alien invasion post-apocalyptic novel, and I'm thinking of bringing in a romantic scene in that. And that's the first time I've ever thought of something like that. You know, so it'll be interesting to see how I tackle that. You know, whether I'm capable of actually pulling that off. You know, so that's quite interesting. But I mean, generally, I'm not really drawn to that kind of fiction, to be honest with you. So yeah, but it'll be interesting to see. So yeah.
I was going to say war stories, but then when Keith was talking, I was thinking that really what I do read are war stories, but they're war stories, not as in going to battle, is the war stories between the characters as they move through their story. So, to answer your question, yeah, maybe World War II story, something like that.
Right. Alex, is there a genre that you often don't read?
I'm going to be honest. My answer is a little bit more complicated because I'm actually quite new to reading. If that's being dyslexic, I avoided reading all my life because I found it so hard. About 6-7 years ago, my daughter confronted me with the Chronicles of Narnia. Said, "Read this," and I was like, "I'm dyslexic. I can't read. You know, I can't do that."
Yeah, and that's a hard one.
Books, you know.
Yeah.
And she kept on until eventually I kind of almost gave in to show her that she wouldn't understand it. But strangely, it was very slow, but we got through it. And for the first time in my life, 6 years ago, I actually found the joy in reading. So, which is I know it's a strange answer to your question, but most of the books I've read are read with my daughter, who's now a teenager, but because being dyslexic, I find reading aloud actually is a lot easier than reading in my head. So I suppose that kind of taints my answer in a way. I don't read a lot of books just for myself. I read most books with my daughter. She's a teenager, so we do adult books. We've done Dickens, we've done all sorts of things. But I suppose from preference, maybe I wouldn't do sort of really dark horror. Because I am a little bit like you, Heather. I'm a little bit sensitive with that. It would probably give me nightmares.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't do sort of hard romance or anything like that. Love science fiction, love fantasy, love dark stuff, love cyberpunk, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, sorry, it's not a simple answer, but yeah, that's
I understand. I understand. My family is full of readers on both sides of my. So
what won't you read?
I don't know that I have a genre I don't read. I'm not a huge fan of World War I and World War II. And I think it's because I'm a snob and I was a history major in college, and my professors, we were ancient medieval. My time periods are ancient medieval. And so my professors were of the opinion that if it has happened in the last 200 years, it's not history, it's a current event. And so we can't really analyze its historical worth because people who were alive when it happened are still alive now. If it happened in the last 50 to 100 years. And so
listen, we've had arguments where I've mentioned, so in the history of the 20th century, and I get about that part, she goes, There's no such thing as the history of the 20th century.
Right. It's not old enough yet
And
to
then,
have a
and then
history.
that becomes the whole discussion. I
Right.
forget
We never
eventually
get
what I
to
was
we never
gonna
get to
ask.
his question. But it is so I think that maybe my dislike for those particular war stories are that it's, I kind of feel like they're too new. Though I have read a few that were set in World War II or set in World War I or nonfiction about some of those wars. And I've enjoyed them. It's just never what I pick up on my own. And there's a new novel out, and I can't remember the name of it. I think it's quite popular. It's put out by one of the big five, but it's set during the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War somehow plays a role in it. And as soon as I saw the word Vietnam, I put it back on the shelf. And my mom said, "No, I hear it's really good." And I was like, "Come on, Mom, not something from 1970. So I think that even though like the contemporary romances I read are all set in like today's time period, like they don't put down what year they're in, but it could have happened yesterday or last year. So, and I'll read those. But if it's a book that's like historical fiction, I want it to be the Victorian period or older. I don't want it to be anything modern. But if you bring me a good book, if you're a friend of mine and I'm like, "Hey, I just read this really good book that was set in World War II, and I know it's not your jam, but you have to read it," I usually read it and enjoy it, but it's not one I'll pick up off a shelf on my own. What about you? What genre or subgenre don't you read?
As far as genre itself, I don't think there's any genre that I won't read.
That's not true.
Well, no, there are subgenres I may not read.
Right.
Like I'll read romance. There's a lot of romance novels I've enjoyed. I like mysteries. I love horror. I love sci-fi, fantasy. I can't think of any overall genre I won't read.
That's true.
Now,
overall genre.
when it comes to horror, I really, because I'm pretty squeamish, I don't get into the extreme horror.
Right.
When it starts getting overly gory or really blood or really, it's like, okay, I'm moving on. It's a good story, but no, I can't.
Right,
I
can't do it.
Can't do this.
Yeah.
I guess body horror, depending.
Yeah, Steve does have a
light
squeamish.
body horror,
Steve has a squeamish, like you can't talk about eyeballs exploding slowly with Steve. It freaks him out.
Yeah,
it does. He's got a weird eye thing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can bring up any monster you want, and that's fine. Vampires, werewolves, whatever, aliens, but worms or parasites, and dissolving somebody from the inside out. It's like,
it gets to him. It gets to him. He'll read it, but it gets to him.
And then Killer will testify, like, I like romance, but when it starts getting over the line,
it has to be off page. It has to be off page romance. Steve's like, "What's happening?" It's like watching your friends have sex, and I'm like, "Well, okay." He can't do it. He can't do it. Yeah, he can't do it. He can't do it. But yeah, that's it. It's with Steve. It's really gory body horror. Gets to him, and that's what will cause him not to sleep. Like he gets in kind of a dwelling thinking when the body horror is really graphic and really descriptive, and he can't shake it off. So, but and it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because remember when Connor was little, Steve had a thing about eyes, about getting, and I think it was because of something Stephen King wrote in that book, Thinner. Was Thinner the one?
Wait, I don't.
But it was, Steve has a real big thing about being stabbed in the eye or being stung in the eye.
It's because of our son. He jammed me in the eye.
You had a fear. You had a fear before that happened, because when it happened, of course, because I am a caring and nurturing person. When it happened, what I said was, "This is your own fault. You're so terrified of being stabbed in the eye. You got stabbed and you made it happen." Because our son, when he was like 1, he had victoriously stolen a straw from a drink, and then
right out of my drink,
and then he jammed it right into his eye. We had to go to the emergency room. Like his eye was bleeding. It was gross. But
I had a perfect end of a straw shaped red mark on my eye.
But it was
Well, can you blame me? Who
Right.
else did?
nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. But we do have a tendency to manifest our fears in this house, I think. But
So,
yeah. So what was your next question?
well, pulling back to the
pulling back.
Going back to the whole flawed characters thing. So another question I want to throw out at y'all: do y'all have a favorite dark or really flawed character from something you've read? What's one of the first characters that springs to mind when you think of that sort of story?
A favorite? Well, for mine. Oh, you got one, Alex?
Just a quick one, and you already mentioned it, but I'm currently working my way through Lord of the Rings for myself, which is a massive task, and I'm on book 2.
Wait, Evan's here.
Oh, hi, Evan.
Hello.
Hey, man.
Hi,
Sorry about the. It's been
no worries. Yeah, no worries.
Oh,
No
where
worries.
am I?
In the car.
I'm in the car. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been quite the morning. But I really wanted to try to make it. So.
You did.
I'm not very presentable.
That's okay. You don't have to be. Yeah, we were just talking about favorite stories, favorite characters that are flawed in any book that you've read. What were some of your favorite or early flawed characters?
And Alex, you were saying Lord of the Rings?
I was just about to say, Lord of the Rings, it's got to be
Sounds like I have to
Smeagol
think.
for me, I think.
Yeah.
You know, Gollum, because he's just so flawed. And sometimes you think, I feel sorry for him, but most of the time you just kind of think, oh, what a wretch, you know?
Yeah. Gollum's the ultimate flawed character, I think. Yeah. So what about you, Bev or Keith? You got a favorite flawed character?
Oh, I kind of I would have to say Anne Rice is the Vampire Lestat for being the most incorrigible, flawed character. Yeah. Love him to pieces, but all the flaws, like.
Oh yeah,
it's big.
It is big. What about you, Keith?
Sauron, the Dark Lord Sauron.
Sauron.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Who's yours? Favorite flawed character? I love it when he asks questions that he hasn't thought of the answer to himself yet.
You know, I would probably go back to, again, I would go to Lord of the Rings, probably myself. One, because like I said, it's my oldest and most loved book. And I would add to what Alex has said, I really enjoyed Gollum's tale. I also enjoy Saruman in the book. And in a lot of ways, there's a really strong similarity between the both of them in that they're flawed, they're messed up, they're villainous, and there are points in the story where there's a chance that there's an opportunity for them to get on a redemption arc, to get on a path to leaving it behind, and they consider it, and then they either lose that chance or they pull away from it. But there's a turning point in each of them. And I did enjoy that for both of their stories.
I think mine, as far as my oldest in love with flawed hero, it's going to have to be Victor Frankenstein. Because he is such, I mean, listen, I'm a huge fan of Mary Shelley and I'm a huge fan of Frankenstein, and that's 100% my parents' fault. But the thing I love about Victor Frankenstein is how often he like faints and has to lay down. Like he is a Victorian woman. Like Mary Shelley wrote him as a woman whose corset is too tight all the time. And so it's almost like she's written him as this like the ultimate flawed Victorian woman. You know, he's got to lay down and get clear air. Like he's so overwhelmed by his own bad decisions all the time. He has to take a break, you know, and go lay down on the chase kind of thing. And so I love it because it's like juxtaposition with a really intelligent, almost to the point of crazy scientist
But then, you know, he's, I have to lay down. It's overwhelming. The headache is pounding. It's everything you think about women in the 1800s, you know, having to sneak upstairs to loosen their corset strings so they can breathe and they don't pass out cold, and so they don't get a headache in the afternoons. So I love him for that.
Well, I'm going to say I hear what you're saying, and I can also feel the hate coming at us on social media.
Now, listen, who's really read Frankenstein a lot has to agree that Victor is not only just a mad scientist, but he is definitely the need to take a nap mad scientist. What about you, Evan? How about you for your favorite flawed?
Oh, I've been sitting here trying to think. I thought we were talking about Keith's in Keith's book.
Yeah.
But,
well, that's what started it, was Hendrix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, how we love to hate Hendrix.
The big one that springs to mind is, you have to forgive me. I think his name is Tarrant, if I remember right. It's from C.S. Friedman's Cold Fire trilogy.
Oh, I haven't read it.
I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And I read it the first time back in 90 something, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And the first chapter, I guess it's more of a prologue, is probably one of the most brutal prologues that I've ever read. And I don't want to spoil anything, but I think the first book is called When True Night Falls, and she's since written a couple of prequels. And but yeah, I want to say his name is Tarrant, and he has a wife and he has 2 kids, and it takes place on another planet, and it's sci-fi fantasy. The science fiction aspect is very, very cool. The fantasy aspect is very, very cool. But this character you despise and hate just from this first prologue, and then through the series you come to really like him in a weird way. So yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Excellent. Okay, and it's the Cold Fire trilogy?
Yeah, it's called the Cold Fire trilogy by C.S. Friedman. I think it's Freidman or ID. I know I comes before E, or whatever the rule is. That's why
what
I
the
I can't remember
the EI rule is. Yeah. I'll have to check it out. I haven't read those. Have you read?
No.
Okay. I'm always excited when we pick up a new author or a new book. So, okay, did you have another question?
No, I want to make sure I give time for everybody here at the end.
Yeah.
So, Evan, since you came in a little bit later, I want to give you a chance just to introduce yourself. Plug yourself a little bit, what you're working on, what you've done, what you may have in the future. So, let us and all people.
Yeah, my name's Evan, and when I first started getting on social media, I decided to just kind of be a curator of. I'm not a writer; I'm just a reader, and I decided to curate books. Basically, I've been in love with books ever since I can remember. I've always had books with me, and my house is jam packed. Between my wife and I, we have about 10,000 print books and
yes,
Kindle books. I've got. I'm approaching 7,000 Kindle ebooks.
See, I'm not so bad. Yeah.
And so once in a while, every once in a while, I'll find I really don't read any mainstream, big authors much anymore. Everything, for the last at least 10 years or more, it's all been independent authors. And every once in a while, I'll find one that it just, clicks. And, Keith, the Jesus man, I know I've told him a few times that I have the audio book. I try to read the print book at least once a year, but I listen to the audio book probably at least twice a year. Wow. And because it's just, I don't know. And I really can't tell you why. It's just fascinating. I find it absolutely fascinating. And I've read, I think, everything else he's done. There might be one or two that I haven't. Maybe, I don't know, but I've read them. Why am I? There we go. Okay. But he's like a literary chameleon. He can write horror. He
Yes.
can write
Yeah.
science fiction. This with this new one, Synthetica. I'm really getting like this, like the old film noir kind of
Yes.
feel from
Yes.
it. Not. It's almost more that than it is cyberpunk. It's like a cyberpunk noir, I guess. I don't know.
Noir. Yeah.
And just the main character, just the way he acts and the way he talks and all that. It's just awesome. It's just another one of his awesome books.
Yeah. Agreed. And it's so it is, I think chameleon's a good word, because I do think, Keith, you bring a voice that's a voice people recognize from the genre. Like there's a different voice between the voices in Grimdark and Synthetica are so different to me. I mean, so different that you could almost be surprised it's by the same author, because they're the tone of narration is radically not the same. And so I do think that's one of your greatest gifts as a writer.
And I would very strongly agree with that. And it's not just the tone of the narrator's voice, but also just a general description and telling the story. It's it has a totally different vibe than in the Grimdark.
Yeah.
I mean, what I guess what I always try to do is I approach every different story, thinking to myself, I'm going to write it how it needs to be presented. So obviously with Synthetica, it had to be from his perspective for it to work. But also I try to think about, the kind of world that I'm sort of laying out, and what does it need? Does it need a Gothic atmosphere? Does it need, a very futuristic atmosphere? And I just try to consider all of those aspects and sort of write it appropriately. And I guess that's, when we started this conversation today, I was kind of saying, well, I like to be a dark fiction author, but I don't want to just be doing one thing. I want to explore all the possibilities of that. And I feel that maybe I've got the scope to be able to do that. So if I do have the scope to do it, then I want to pursue it. I'm not necessarily saying that I will always get it right, but I certainly try to get it right. So yeah. I mean, it's lovely to hear that Evan say that. It's lovely to hear you guys say that you think I'm a bit of a chameleon in that sense. But we'll find out with that romance piece.
Yeah, that's right. I'm anxious to read the romance to see how you do.
I was just sitting here thinking. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I was just sitting here thinking. Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
No, go ahead.
You go ahead, Evan. Yeah, you go ahead.
While you were talking, I was just seriously thinking, is he going to? What's he going to write next? A Western, romance? And so it's funny to hear that you're actually going to write a romance.
Well, actually, I'm not. I'm writing an alien. I'm writing an alien invasion post-apocalyptic novel. Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but there's going to be some scenes in there which he's gone. He's back.
I'm back.
Yeah. There's going to be some scenes in there which I'm going to explore a relationship between two people in that situation, which I kind of really haven't done before. Right. So basically what it is we've been taken over. There's alien overlords. We've been sent back to the Stone Age. It takes place in Alaska, in the Tongass National Park. We're running around with flint axes and arrows, and we're trying to stay alive while our alien overlords, with their high technology and all the rest of it, are slowly trying to wipe us all out. So it's called Windrust. And I'm going to explore kind of. I think I'm really going to go down to sort of as much exploration of what it means to be a human in those circumstances, in those real extreme circumstances, how it would make you feel about your fight for survival. And, it's obviously going to bring people together and make them bond. So that's why I thought, well, obviously we need to explore some, potential romances, because people are going to be clinging to any kind of hope that they can, and sort of human comfort. So that's what I'm going to do for that. But I'm definitely not writing a full-blown romance novel. I don't think I'm quite there yet.
Come on, you can do it. You can do
it. I would still have to read it.
Right.
I very much appreciate the fact that you read everything I put out, Evan. I mean, you've been there from day one, man. You really have. You've been my biggest shouter, I think.
I think, and I don't really do that much anymore on social media, just because it's just gotten so literally insane.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's great to be able to connect with something like this. And it's I have that podcast that I haven't done anything with for 4 years, I think, just because I don't know, but I'd sure like to. I still want to have you on at some point.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. One day.
Cool.
Okay, so let's do a quick wrap up, because it has been an hour, which I can't believe already. And I want to make an announcement that I'm going to put a link in the comments of the YouTube and the Facebook video. It's for a 3 ebook giveaway through BookFunnel. So the link will appear once this gets posted in both places, which happens a couple minutes after the live ends. It's going to be just the first 3 people who click on the link. So it's first come, first serve. We'll get the book. But let's take a quick minute and do a wrap up really quick, where people can find you, where people should look for you, what you've got coming out, what you might have coming out, what you hope to have coming out. So Bev, we'll start with you, and then do Bev and Alex, and then we'll end with Keith.
Okay, well, you can find me on beverlylee.com, where there's details of all my books, a bit about me, and where to buy the books. I'm currently deep in edit with book 2 of A Conclave of Crimson with Nicola Eisner. And I have a story that's percolating that I actually haven't written any words yet, which is about a hanging tree.
Oh, now we're talking. Alex, how about you?
I mean, I've just finished working on a little novella called The Nameless. That's pretty much finished and wrapped up. Got a cover to do for that. Okay. Difficult to say too much without giving it away, but imagine kind of Oliver Twist, the Dickens story, meets maybe Blade Runner.
Okay.
And what kind of baby might happen. Okay. So it's a bit of a Dickensian science fiction mix-up, really.
Okay. And Evan, is there a website where people could look for you?
I do have a WordPress blog, from the Wastes 11811 .wordpress/.com. I'm mostly on Twitter though, at From the Wastes, or at last_librarian.
Okay,
and
perfect.
I've got a Tumblr thing. I've got but I just haven't done much with a lot of that. I do check my Twitter every day, so I try to spend my time reading. So
yes. And Keith, where do we find you? Like, Synthetica comes out on Tuesday is when it'll drop. If you've got a pre-order, that's when it'll hit the mail or hit your e-reader. But what else you got coming?
Well, you can find me on, I will call it Twitter, because I hate calling it X. I don't know what that's all about now.
I can't even remember to call it X.
I mean, I'm kind of on Instagram, but I'm too bloody old for that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Let's be honest about it here. I'm not down with the kids or anything. So, and as I say, I'm working on that Windrust, but I mean, I'm only about 20K into that, and it's, sci-fi has to be long format, so I'm a long ways away from that. It's going to be a planned trilogy. That's the idea.
Nice.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
And then there's also something in the works that you guys may already know about or may not already know about between Beverly Lee and myself. So, you know, just kind of watch this space on that one. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's
This
something
year.
emerging
This
there. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
So that's it.
All
That's what it
right.
is.
Okay. Well, thank you guys all for joining us. And if you're in the military in the United States, happy Armed Service Day.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys next time. But thank you so much for joining the launch. And in a few minutes, the video will be up on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll put the book funnel giveaway link in it.
Fantastic.
So
thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate you turning up. And
Thank you.
last minute diving in
Great
there.
weekend,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Yeah, thank you. Nice meeting you all. Good to talk to you.
nice to see you. I'm glad you made it, Evan.
Everyone
All right.
take care. Everyone
Okay,
take care.
bye.
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 Bye.